Picture a Friday evening. It doesn't matter which year. Somewhere between 1990 and 2003 will do. You've finished dinner. The kids are restless. Your partner suggests a film. And without thinking about it, without any debate, without checking a phone, without asking anyone anything, you all know exactly where you're going. You can see the sign from half a mile down the road, blue and yellow, lit from within, throwing that particular glow across the car park tarmac. The automatic doors slide open and the smell hits you immediately. A wave of carpet fiber, warm air, buttered popcorn from a machine near the entrance. And the faintly plastic scent of 1,000 video cases arranged with military precision on floor-to-ceiling shelves. Children scatter. Someone is already at the horror wall. Someone else is holding up a comedy and defending their choice to anyone who'll listen. The new releases line the right-hand wall. One copy on display per title, the rest filed in drawers below. You have, at most, 40 minutes before someone loses patience. And in those 40 minutes, you have to choose. That was Blockbuster. That specific texture of a Friday evening, the particular quality of its light, its carpet, its managed chaos, is what millions of people in dozens of countries remember. Not as nostalgia for the corporation, as memory of a ritual, a shared experience that felt, at the time, utterly ordinary, and that is now completely gone. At its peak, in the year 2004, Blockbuster Video operated 9,094 stores across the globe, employed 84,300 people, and generated revenues approaching $6 billion annually. Those stores sat in 25 countries, 65 million registered members had a Blockbuster card in their wallets. On any given Friday night, more people were inside a Blockbuster store than attended every Major League Baseball game played that entire week. The company's market capitalization, at its height, was measured in billions. Its brand recognition, in surveys conducted across the mid-1990s, rivaled that of Coca-Cola in the markets where it operated. They survived the arrival of cable television in the 1980s, which was supposed to make video rental obsolete before it had properly begun. They survived the format war between VHS and Betamax, which could have fractured their inventory and confused their customers. They survived the transition from VHS to DVD, an entirely new format, an entirely new supply chain, an entirely new physical product, and came through it stronger than before. They survived the Paramount acquisition that loaded their corporate parent with debt. They survived competition from Hollywood Video and Movie Gallery, the only chains large enough to mount a genuine national challenge, and outlasted both of them. They survived a decade of being accused of destroying the independent video store. And then, after nearly 20 years of building, expanding, acquiring, and enduring, they went bankrupt. In 4 years, 9,000 stores closed, 84,000 jobs were lost. A company that once seemed as permanent and inevitable as petrol stations and supermarkets became a ghost, then a cautionary tale, then a punchline. The blue and yellow sign that had once announced itself on shopping strips across 25 countries was gone from all but one location on Earth. How does the world's dominant home entertainment company, profitable, established, with millions of loyal customers and a brand that commanded instant recognition, collapse so completely that today only a single franchise store survives in a strip mall in Central Oregon? And what actually happened inside those boardrooms, in those specific meetings, in those months when the decisions were made that sealed the fate of every single one of those 9,094 stores? Those are the two questions this film is going to answer, fully, with names, dates, and decisions attached. If you're enjoying this documentary so far, leave a comment below and tell us what your Friday Blockbuster routine looked like. Were you a comedy family? Horror? Did you argue over the last copy of a new release? Chapter 1. The Database Man with the Empty Shelves. David Cook was not, by nature or inclination, a movie person. He was a data person. Born in 1954 in Texas, he had spent his late 20s and early 30s building software systems for the oil and gas industry. A world built not on stories or entertainment, but on data sets, pipelines, the management of geological surveys, and the precise organization of complex financial information. His company, Cook Data Services Incorporated, was founded in 1982 in Dallas and sold computerized solutions to Texas oil firms at a time when the state's energy sector seemed inexhaustible and the future seemed certain. Cook was, by 1983, operating in a world of extraction and precision. He thought in systems. He looked at any complex human activity and instinctively asked, what is the logic underneath this? What is the variable that determines output? Where is the inefficiency, and what is the cost of not eliminating it? He was in his early 30s, running his own technology business, already comfortable with systems thinking, when the oil and gas industry collapsed beneath him. In 1983, a surplus of crude oil flooded the global market. Prices fell. The Texas firms that had been paying Cook's company for software retreated or dissolved. Cook Data Services found itself without a meaningful customer base almost overnight. Cook had taken his company public, and within 6 months of listing, his sector had evaporated. The timing could not have been worse. He needed a new business, and he needed one that could generate revenue quickly from an existing market. The idea came from his wife, Sandy. Sandy Cook spent months, while her husband was managing the quiet contraction of Cook Data Services, researching the home video rental industry. The VHS format had taken hold across American households through the early 1980s. Millions of families owned or rented a VCR player. The studios had, reluctantly, accepted that home video was not going away. A market was there, broad and growing. But the infrastructure serving that market was, by any business standard, a shambles. By 1985, there were approximately 19,000 video rental stores operating across the United States. Almost all of them were small, independent, family-run operations. Most carried a few hundred titles. New releases were kept behind the counter or locked in a separate section. Customers had to ask for what they wanted, often to be told it was already checked out. The stores were dimly lit, frequently disorganized, and entirely dependent on a narrow inventory of whatever happened to be popular that particular week. The economics were locked by a single constraint: the cost of each tape. Distributors were charging approximately $70 per VHS cassette, a price set deliberately high because the major studios wanted to maximize their revenue on each title before it entered mass circulation. That $70 barrier meant that a small video store could only afford to carry 1 or 2 copies of any given film. When a new release arrived, those 1 or 2 copies were gone within hours of opening. David Cook looked at this industry through the eyes of a software architect. He didn't see a charming cottage industry with a human scale appeal. He saw an inefficiency problem with an obvious, if expensive, solution. The solution was scale, data, and volume. If you could stock not 1 or 2 copies of a new release but 20 or 30, and if you could deploy an inventory management system sophisticated enough to track every single rental in real time, You could solve the empty shelf problem that was the single greatest frustration of every video rental customer in America. Cook sold Cook Data Services to its own managers and used the proceeds, along with a personal loan that put him close to the edge financially, to lease a property at 9444 North Central Expressway in Dallas, Texas. The space was enormous by video rental standards. He spent weeks designing the floor plan himself, drawing on his years of database architecture. Every tape would be displayed on a shelf, spine out, arranged by genre, exactly like a bookshop. No titles behind a counter, no asking. You walked in, you browsed, you picked up the physical case, you read the back, and you carried it to the desk. He invested in a computerized inventory system before it opened. Barcodes on every tape, barcodes on every member card, a laser scanner at the checkout. This was October 1985. Most video stores in America were still running paper ledgers. Cook was building what would become the first data-driven, high-volume, family-oriented video retail operation in the country. He also made a deliberate decision that shaped everything that followed. Blockbuster would have no adult section. Many of the independent video stores carried explicit material. It was often a significant revenue source. Cook decided that Blockbuster would be explicitly, entirely, visibly family-friendly. Clean shelves, bright lighting, a mainstream inventory. The kind of store you could walk into without embarrassment, with children, without any awkwardness. The blue and yellow color scheme was chosen specifically for its warmth and approachability. On October 19, 1985, the first Blockbuster video store opened its doors at 9444 North Central Expressway, Dallas. The store held 8,000 VHS tapes and 2,000 Betamax cassettes, 10,000 items when most competitors managed 500. The catalog covered 6,500 distinct titles, more than any video rental outlet in Texas, possibly in the country. Cook had spent close to $3 million stocking and fitting that single location. The store was spacious, the carpet was clean, the shelves were lit. There was a computerized checkout with barcodes and scanners. Membership was registered on the system. Every rental was logged. Every return was tracked. It was an immediate and spectacular success. Within weeks, the first Dallas location was generating revenues that Cook had projected for an entire quarter. Customers drove from across the city to use it, not just because of the selection, but because of the experience. You could find what you wanted, you could browse without help, you could pick up the case and read it. You were, for the first time, in a video store that treated you like someone browsing a bookshop rather than a customer at a pharmacy counter. Cook opened 3 more stores in 1986. He purchased a $6 million warehouse that year to serve as a distribution center for his growing tape library. The computer system tracked every rental across all 4 locations in real time. Cook could see at any given moment which titles were performing, which shelves needed restocking, which stores were running low on copies of a particular film. Chapter 2. The Man from Waste Management and the Store Every 17 Hours. By early 1987, Cook had 19 Blockbuster stores and a business model that clearly worked. The stores were profitable. The computer system was running efficiently. The customer experience was measurably better than anything else on the market. But there were problems that the revenue figures concealed. Debt was accumulating faster than the stores could retire it. Expansion required capital Cook couldn't generate internally at the pace he needed. He had also begun to worry, not entirely without reason, about the long-term structural future of physical video rental. Cable television was improving year by year. Pay-per-view was arriving. The format he had built around felt, to Cook, like a business with a finite lifespan, and he wasn't certain where the end of that lifespan was. So when a consortium of investors approached him in 1987 about acquiring a significant stake, Cook was willing to listen. One of those investors was H. Wayne Huizenga. Huizenga was 49 years old. He had built Waste Management Incorporated, starting in 1968 with a single garbage truck, a route, and an ambition that his contemporaries found excessive, into the largest waste disposal company in the world. The method he had used to accomplish this was total and relentless consolidation, acquiring competitors, absorbing their routes, eliminating duplication, and repricing. He had done this in an industry most people considered mundane and unglamorous, and he had made himself extraordinarily wealthy doing it. He knew nothing about film. He had no particular passion for entertainment or storytelling. What he saw in Blockbuster's 19-store operation was something far more familiar to him: a fragmented market with no dominant player, an underserved customer base, and proven unit economics at the store level. He recognized the architecture of the opportunity. Huizenga paid approximately $18.5 million for his initial stake, roughly $36 million in today's terms. His business associate John Melk came with him. By the end of 1987, Huizenga had assumed full operational control of the company and relocated the headquarters to Fort Lauderdale, Florida. David Cook departed at 33, his creation intact, but no longer his. What followed was expansion at a velocity the retail industry had rarely seen. Huizenga's model was systematic and, in its own way, elegant. Open new stores in every viable market, using the Blockbuster system, the Blockbuster look, the Blockbuster inventory levels. Acquire existing video chains wholesale, stripping out inferior systems and replacing them with Blockbusters. Price aggressively enough to create competitive pressure on independents who couldn't respond at scale. The growth numbers from this period are genuinely difficult to process. In 1987, when Huizenga took control, there were 19 stores. By 1988, there were more than 400. By 1990, Blockbuster had crossed 1,000 locations. By 1992, the count was over 2,500. At certain periods during this expansion, Blockbuster was opening a new store every 17 hours. Not every day, every 17 hours. The supply economics were restructured simultaneously. Huizenga's team negotiated revenue-sharing agreements with the major Hollywood studios, a genuinely revolutionary arrangement for the video rental industry. Instead of the distributor's standard model, in which a rental store paid approximately $70 per tape up front, Blockbuster negotiated a lower per-unit cost in exchange for sharing a percentage of rental revenue with the studio. This was transformative. It meant Blockbuster could afford to stock 20, 30, sometimes 40 copies of a new release. The "we're out" problem that had defined video rental since its inception, and that Cook's original insight had been designed to address, essentially disappeared at a Blockbuster location with this model in place. The independent stores could not match this arrangement. They lacked the volume to negotiate revenue sharing. They couldn't afford to stock 20 copies of anything. They couldn't invest in barcode systems or computerized inventory. One by one, across the country, the neighborhood video stores that had served their communities for a decade began to close. Some sold their stock to Blockbuster at bulk discount. Most simply locked their doors. By 1989, the first international stores had opened, in London and in Canada. The blue and yellow sign crossed the Atlantic. It appeared in Australia, in Brazil, in Japan, across continental Europe. The format translated with remarkable consistency. The same layout, the same systems, the same family-friendly presentation. Blockbuster was not merely a video store chain, it had become a global entertainment infrastructure. In 1992, Huizenga pushed into music retail, acquiring the Sound Warehouse and Music Plus chains to create Blockbuster Music, an early sign that he was thinking about the company as an entertainment platform rather than simply a video rental operation. This was prescient in its ambition, if premature in its execution. By 1993, Blockbuster was generating revenues exceeding $1 billion annually. The company's market capitalization had grown from approximately $7 million at the time of David Cook's founding to approximately $8.5 billion. A share price appreciation for those who had invested at the beginning of more than 14,000%. Wayne Huizenga decided in 1993 to sell Chapter 3, The Billion-Dollar Handshake, The Debt, and The Friday Night. The buyer was Sumner Redstone, chairman of Viacom Inc., a media conglomerate whose portfolio included MTV, Nickelodeon, Paramount Pictures, and a collection of television stations and cable networks that made it one of the most powerful entertainment companies in the world. The announcement came on January 7, 1994. Viacom and Blockbuster would merge in a deal valued at $8.4 billion. The ritual was specific and almost universal across the English-speaking world through the 1990s and into the early 2000s. You finished dinner. You drove to the store, almost always within 5 minutes of wherever you lived. Because by the late 1990s, Blockbuster had a location in virtually every significant suburb in America, Britain, Australia, and Canada. You pushed through the automatic doors into that combination of carpet and cool air and fluorescent light. The new releases lined the right-hand wall. Children went left toward animation and family. Adults drifted toward drama, comedy, thriller. The horror section was always at the back, slightly darker, slightly more adult in its atmosphere. The choosing was the experience. You had to decide. You had 3 choices, because 3 was the standard rental, and those 3 had to last the weekend. You picked up a case, read the back, put it down, picked up another. The staff knew the stock. This is worth emphasizing specifically, because it became significant later. The young men and women working behind the counter at an individual Blockbuster, frequently film enthusiasts who had sought the job precisely for the staff discount, could recommend. They knew which copy of a particular tape was degraded. They knew which new releases were genuinely good and which had under-delivered. They curated person to person with actual knowledge. This human element existed at the store level, built into the job description of every weekend employee. There was also woven through this ritual a mechanism that customers despised but tolerated: the late fee. Return a tape a day or 2 past the due date, which crept up on you with an ease that felt designed because it was, and you paid again. Depending on the store and the title, a late fee could equal or exceed the original rental cost. It was also, by any financial measure, a machine. At Blockbuster's peak, late fees generated approximately $800 million per year. Roughly 16 cents of every revenue dollar came from penalties applied to customers who had already paid for the product. The late fee required no additional inventory, no additional marketing, no additional human resource beyond the brief friction of the checkout conversation. It was pure margin, collected from a captive customer base that had nowhere else to go. The studios accepted it. The customers grumbled and paid, and the executives who would later attempt to remove it would find themselves in a fight that threatened not just the business model, but the company's physical survival. By 2004, the peak had arrived and was already beginning to recede. 9,094 stores, 84,300 employees, 25 countries. A brand that required no explanation anywhere in the developed world. The blue and yellow sign announcing itself on the high street, on the retail park, on the suburban strip mall. On any Friday evening between 1994 and 2004, there were more people inside Blockbuster stores than in any other entertainment venue on the planet. But the technology underneath that Friday evening was already changing. And in a small office in Scotts Valley, California, a man who claimed, with some embellishment, that a $40 late fee had started it all, was building a machine that would make all 9,094 of those stores unnecessary. Chapter 4. The late fee, the red envelope, and the crack in the wall. Reed Hastings tells the story this way. In 1997, he borrowed a copy of Apollo 13 from his local video store and returned it 6 weeks late. He owed $40 in late fees. He was embarrassed and annoyed, and on the drive to the gym afterward, watching a monthly membership model operate with no penalty for underuse, he conceived the idea for a subscription-based video rental service with no late fees. Hastings himself has since acknowledged that the $40 Apollo 13 story may be a slightly polished founding myth, a good anecdote that captures the concept without necessarily being accurate in every detail. But as a description of what was wrong with video rental in the late 1990s, it was entirely precise. In 1998, Hastings co-founded Netflix with Mark Randolph, a direct marketing specialist in Scotts Valley, California. The initial service was DVD by mail. Customers registered online, maintained a ranked queue of films they wanted to see, and received DVDs through the post in a distinctive red envelope. When you finished one, you returned it in the same envelope, postage prepaid, and the next title in your queue was dispatched within 24 hours. There was no due date, there was no late fee. There was a flat monthly subscription, initially $15.95 for 4 titles out at a time. The model was possible because of a format shift that Blockbuster had already successfully navigated. The transition from VHS to DVD. DVDs had arrived in the United States in 1997. They were lighter than VHS cassettes, more durable, significantly cheaper to press and distribute, and offered substantially better picture quality. They were also small enough and light enough to post as first-class mail for a few cents. A VHS cassette weighed nearly half a pound. A DVD weighed roughly an ounce. The economics of postal distribution, which had been impossible for VHS, were obvious for DVD. Blockbuster had handled the VHS to DVD transition reasonably well, converting its inventory and store layouts as DVD penetration in American households grew through the late 1990s. What Blockbuster had inadvertently done, in adapting to the DVD format, was solve the physical infrastructure problem that made its future competitor viable. The format shift that Blockbuster managed successfully was the same shift that allowed Netflix to mail films to people's doors for pennies. This is the first great irony in Blockbuster's story. The very format change that should have reinforced their position, and did, operationally, created the conditions for their destruction. In Blockbuster's Dallas headquarters, Netflix was not, in 1998 and 1999, taken seriously as a threat. The company was small, a startup with an unproven model and no brick-and-mortar presence. It was losing money. It depended on a postal service that couldn't guarantee same-day delivery. What Blockbuster's leadership failed to register was not Netflix's size in 1999, but its direction. The late fee model was corroding the customer relationship from below. Internal surveys at Blockbuster documented the hostility clearly. A significant percentage of registered members were reducing their rental frequency specifically because they feared incurring a penalty. They had learned, through experience, through the particular humiliation of paying twice for something they had already rented, to approach the store with a kind of wariness that was antithetical to the impulsive, pleasure-seeking behavior that profitable video rental required. What almost nobody at Blockbuster acknowledged publicly in those years is that their own research confirmed this. The late fee was generating $800 million annually. It was also actively suppressing the core business it was meant to protect. The model was eating itself. The CEO, who finally grasped this, and who had both the authority and briefly the will to address it, was John Antioco. Antioco joined Blockbuster as Chief Executive Officer in August 1997. He was 47 years old, and he came with a specific kind of credential: retail turnarounds. He had spent 7 years in senior management at 7-Eleven, understanding the mechanics of high-volume, low-margin convenience retail at scale. He had then served as CEO of Circle K, a struggling convenience chain that he stabilized. Then PepsiCo hired him to run Taco Bell, which was floundering, and he restructured it into a dominant fast food force. Antioco was a man who had taken broken businesses and made them functional. He understood the gap between a company's public image and its structural reality. First, the Viacom debt. The acquisition had saddled the company with obligations that constrained every significant investment decision. Second, the late fee model. Generating extraordinary revenue, but poisoning the customer relationship in ways that would take years to appear on the financial statements, but were already showing up in the surveys. Third, the digital horizon. A company called Netflix, losing money in California, was testing a model that eliminated the core customer grievance at a stroke. And the broadband infrastructure that would eventually enable streaming, not yet ubiquitous but coming, was being built across America every year. Antioco saw all three of these clearly. Chapter 5. The Meeting in Dallas and the Man Who Laughed. In the summer of the year 2000, Reed Hastings boarded a flight to Dallas. Netflix was in genuine trouble. The dot-com bubble had burst. The company was burning through cash at a rate that made its survival uncertain. Netflix had lost money every quarter since its founding. The business model was sound. The subscriber numbers were growing, but growth requires capital, and the capital markets had just collapsed. Venture funding was drying up. The company had exhausted most of its conventional options. Hastings called Blockbuster's offices and asked for a meeting. He was granted one. In a conference room in Blockbuster's Dallas headquarters, Hastings sat across from John Antioco. Netflix's co-founder Mark Randolph was present, as was Netflix's CFO Barry McCarthy and several Blockbuster executives. Hastings made his proposal directly. Blockbuster would purchase Netflix for $50 million. In return, Netflix would become Blockbuster's online operation, running the DVD by mail subscription service and eventually whatever digital delivery came next, all under the Blockbuster brand. Blockbuster's physical stores would handle in-store rental. Netflix's systems would handle everything else. Mark Randolph, in his 2019 memoir, That Will Never Work, describes what happened next with precision. Antioco, he writes, struggled not to laugh. The moment was brief, tiny, involuntary, and vanished almost immediately. But it was unmistakable. John Antioco looked at the Netflix proposal, at the two men across from him asking $50 million for a money-losing startup with red envelopes and no stores, and he could barely contain his amusement. The deal went nowhere. Hastings and Randolph flew back to California. The negotiation, such as it was, had lasted less than an hour. But what Antioco did after leaving the room, or rather what he did not do, is where the real failure lies. Having rejected Netflix, Blockbuster made no accelerated investment in its own online offering. It launched no postal subscription service of its own. It revisited the late fee model not at all. It opened more stores. It managed inventory. It collected its $800 million in annual penalties, and it continued operating, with the confidence of a company whose Friday evenings were still full of customers, as though the decision it had just made in that conference room was the final word on the subject. It was not the final word. It was the first sentence of the last chapter. Between 2000 and 2004, Netflix grew from a loss-making curiosity to a business with 4.2 million subscribers. It raised its prices slightly, improved its recommendation algorithm, the engine that suggested what to watch next based on what you'd already rated, and built loyalty among exactly the audience Blockbuster should have been protecting. Frequent renters who were comfortable online and who resented being penalized for returning things late. The red envelopes were arriving in letterboxes across America, and inside Blockbuster's headquarters, the awareness of the threat was growing, but the consensus on how to respond was not. If you're still with us at this point in the documentary, please take a second right now to subscribe and turn on the notification bell. We make these films for people who want the full story, not a summary, not a highlight reel, but the complete account of what actually happened and why. That support is what makes this kind of work possible. Chapter 6: The Activist Investor, the Late Fees, and the War Inside the Boardroom. John Antioco finally decided to move in 2004. He had watched Netflix grow from a loss-making curiosity into a competitive threat that showed up now in Blockbuster's own subscriber metrics. The red envelopes were familiar objects in suburban letterboxes. The late fee resentment was not abating. A generation of consumers who had grown up comfortable online was learning that you could get your films delivered to your door with no due dates, no penalties, and no driving for $15 a month. In 2004, Antioco authorized two strategic initiatives simultaneously. He launched Blockbuster Online, a DVD-by-mail subscription service that would compete directly with Netflix on Netflix's own terms. And he announced the elimination of late fees, an initiative publicly marketed as the End of Late Fees campaign, launched nationally in January 2005. Both decisions were correct. Both were too late, and both would ultimately destroy Antioco personally. Blockbuster Online launched with a feature Netflix could not match. Subscribers could not only receive DVDs by post, but could return them in any Blockbuster store and immediately pick up a replacement from the shelves without waiting for a disc to arrive in the mail. This is where Carl Icahn arrived. Icahn was 68 years old in 2004 and had spent 3 decades as the most aggressive activist investor in American business. His method was simple and had proven effective across dozens of companies. Accumulate a significant stake, take a board seat, identify financial inefficiency, and demand correction. Correction could mean asset sales, restructuring, replacement of management, or strategic reversal, whatever produced the fastest improvement in shareholder returns. He accumulated a significant stake in Blockbuster through 2004 and 2005 and secured seats on the board. The end of late fees campaign, meanwhile, cost the company approximately $400 million in annual revenue. It was a necessary sacrifice. The penalty model had to end if Blockbuster was to compete with subscription alternatives on equal terms, but it hit the balance sheet with brutal immediacy. His assessment of Antiocho's strategy was clear. The end of late fees had cost $400 million, and the benefit was speculative. Blockbuster Online required ongoing investment in a business that was still losing money. The company was bleeding cash in pursuit of a digital future that Ican was not convinced would arrive on the timeline Antiocho projected. From Ican's perspective, from the perspective of a man whose entire career had been built on the principle that short-term financial performance is the only metric that matters, Antiocho was destroying shareholder value in exchange for a strategic bet that had not yet and might never pay off. The conflict between them became, through 2005 and 2006, a proxy war for the soul of Blockbuster. The battleground was Antiocho's compensation. Antiocho's employment contract entitled him to performance bonuses tied to specific financial metrics. As the company's reported losses widened, a direct consequence of the late fee elimination and the investment in Blockbuster Online, Ican argued that the metrics had not been met and that Antiocho was being grotesquely overpaid. Antiocho's position was that he was entitled to $7.7 million. The board, under Ican's influence, offered $2.3 million. The difference was not negotiated to a middle ground. In the summer of 2007, John Antiocho agreed to leave Blockbuster. His final departure package included a 2006 bonus of $3.1 million and a lump sum of $5 million. James Keyes was 49 years old when he assumed the role of Blockbuster CEO in mid-2007. He had spent his career in the convenience retail sector, most recently as CEO of 7-Eleven, where he had successfully turned around the company following its bankruptcy in the early 1990s. He was respected in his field. He had a genuine track record of operational improvement. He was, in his own professional context, a capable and experienced executive. He was, however, chosen not because his background suited the specific competitive crisis Blockbuster faced, but because the board and Ican wanted a CEO who would not pursue Antiocho's strategy. They wanted someone who would defend the brick-and-mortar business model, reduce investment in digital initiatives, and return the company to positive cash flow. Keyes was, by disposition and by professional experience, exactly that person. What he did, in the months following his appointment, was begin to dismantle what Antiocho had built. The late fees came back, not in identical form. The structure was modified, and the marketing used careful language, but the no-late fee policy that had been central to Blockbuster's competitive repositioning against Netflix was effectively reversed. Keyes reinstated charges for extended viewing periods. To customers who had just spent years watching Blockbuster publicly commit to ending penalty fees, this felt like a betrayal. Total access, The program that was at that precise moment frightening Netflix's management was scaled back and then effectively ended. The in-store return option that had given Blockbuster online subscribers their competitive advantage over Netflix was withdrawn. The subscribers who had joined specifically for that feature began to leave. Investment in digital infrastructure was reduced. Keyes's publicly stated vision for Blockbuster's future was focused on the physical store, on improving the in-store experience, on expanding the product range beyond film and video games, on competing with convenience retail. He saw Blockbuster not as an entertainment company facing a technological shift, but as a retail chain facing a customer experience problem. In an interview published in 2008, Keyes told a journalist directly that neither Netflix nor Redbox were on his radar screen as competitive threats. Netflix had launched its streaming service in January 2007. The long-term direction of that service was, by 2008, apparent to anyone paying attention. Broadband penetration in American households was crossing 60%. The bandwidth required to stream a standard definition film reliably was now available to a majority of American homes. The postal DVD service was beginning to look like a bridge to something else rather than the destination. The financial position deteriorated rapidly. The Lehman Brothers collapse in September 2008 triggered a credit crisis that affected Blockbuster directly. Moody's downgraded the company's credit rating. Suppliers reduced payment terms from 90 days to cash on delivery, removing approximately $300 million of working capital from the business almost overnight. The combination of declining revenues, debt obligations, and a collapsed credit environment created a liquidity crisis from which Blockbuster could not recover. Tom Casey, who served as Blockbuster's chief financial officer through this period, gave the most precise assessment. Most people think Blockbuster went out of business because of Netflix. What really happened was Blockbuster and Netflix were pretty evenly positioned to grow in the mid-2000s and 2007, 08, and 09. They had capital. We did not. On September 23, 2010, Blockbuster Incorporated filed for Chapter 11 bankruptcy protection in the United States Bankruptcy Court for the Southern District of New York. The debt on the filing totaled approximately $1 billion. In April 2011, Blockbuster's assets were auctioned. The winning bid came from Dish Network, a satellite television provider, at a purchase price of $320 million. Dish acquired the brand, the customer database, and the remaining 1,700 store locations, with stated plans to operate some and convert others into distribution points for a Blockbuster-branded streaming service. Neither plan materialized in any meaningful way. Dish was a satellite television company. It was not a retailer. The remaining corporate stores began closing, one by one, then in batches, then in mass announcements. In January 2014, the final corporate-owned Blockbuster location closed its doors permanently. 9,093 stores gone. There were no ceremonies, no news cameras outside the last corporate location. The lights went off and the shelves were stripped and the blue and yellow sign came down. Employees received redundancy notices and went home. One store remained. So here fully is the answer to the question asked at the beginning of this film. How does the world's dominant home entertainment company collapse so completely? Not because of Netflix alone, not because of streaming alone, not because technology changed and Blockbuster was too slow, though all of those things are true in their limited way. The complete answer is this: Blockbuster was financially hobbled at the precise moment it needed to invest most aggressively by a transaction in 1994 that used its own balance sheet to fund a media acquisition that benefited everyone except Blockbuster. And the second part of the answer, what really happened inside those walls, is this. The people who correctly understood what needed to be done were removed by the people who controlled the capital, who preferred short-term cash flow to long-term survival. John Antioco was not a perfect CEO. He waited too long to act on the late fee problem. He missed the 2000 Netflix meeting badly, but when he finally moved, when Total Access began working, when Blockbuster Online began growing, when the late fee model was being dismantled, he was removed by a board that could not tolerate the interim losses. Today, the buildings that once held Blockbuster stores are not hard to find. In most American suburbs, you can identify the former footprint by its shape. A wide, shallow unit in a strip mall, larger than a restaurant, smaller than a supermarket, often now occupied by a dollar store, a discount mattress outlet, a mobile phone retailer, or, in a register of irony that requires no embellishment, a payday loan shop. The carpet is gone. The shelves are gone. The sign is replaced by something functional and beige. In the United Kingdom, Blockbuster's 528 stores followed the same pattern after the British operation entered administration in January 2013, affecting approximately 4,000 jobs. The high street locations and retail park units are occupied by other tenants or remain vacant. No British Blockbuster survived. One store survived everything. It sits at the intersection of US Route 20 and Revere Avenue in Bend, Oregon, a city of around 100,000 people in the shadow of the Cascade Mountains, known for its craft breweries, its outdoor recreation, and, since 2018, for being the home of the last Blockbuster store on Earth. The store was originally opened in 1992 by Ken and Debbie Tischer, as part of their own small video chain, Pacific Video. They converted it to a Blockbuster franchise in the year 2000, joining the network just as the corporate parent was beginning its long decline. Sandy Harding has served as the store's general manager since 2004. The store stocks approximately 1,200 titles. It has an estimated 4,000 active members who rent DVDs. By 2024, roughly 80% of the store's income came not from rentals, but from merchandise. Branded t-shirts, hats, keychains, coffee mugs, sold to the tourists and nostalgia seekers. A framed Clark's poster, signed by director Kevin Smith, hangs inside. There is a visitor guest book. Film memorabilia from productions across 3 decades of cinema lines the walls. Netflix produced a comedy series in 2022 set in a fictional Blockbuster. It was cancelled. The Ben store is still open. The people who worked those weekend shifts, the young men and women in polo shirts who knew every title on every shelf, who could tell you the third act collapsed, who could recommend something you'd never heard of that turned out to be the best film you saw that year. They were performing a form of human curation that no algorithm has yet fully replicated. The responsibility for what happened to Blockbuster is genuinely distributed. Sumner Redstone, Wayne Huizenga, David Cook, John Antioco, Carl Icahn, Jim Keyes, they all played a part. Netflix made a better product. Then it made a better product again. But Blockbuster had every chance to survive. In the year 2000, Netflix offered itself to Blockbuster for $50 million. In 2026, Netflix's market capitalization stands at well over $400 billion. $50 million is what that conference room in Dallas cost. The blue and yellow sign still illuminates at night on US Route 20 in Bend, Oregon. The DVD cases still snap open and shut. On Friday evenings, locals browse the aisles like it's 1997. Because inside that one store, in a very small way, it still is. Now we want to hear from you. Tell us in the comments, what country are you watching from? What was your Blockbuster ritual? Did your family have a regular Friday evening routine, a standing argument about what to choose? Did you work at a Blockbuster, or did someone in your family? And what struck you most in this story? The meeting in Dallas where Antioco laughed at the $50 million offer. The moment Carl Icahn forced out the one CEO who was winning. The single store in Oregon that survived everything? Write it below. Every comment you leave helps other people find this documentary. And if your family was part of the Blockbuster story, we want to know.